Masechet Baba Kama, Daf Samech, Hasholech et ha'be'era biyad Haresh Shotev Katan, Patur bedine Adam, V'chayav bedine Shamayim, Shalach biyad Pikeach, HaPikeach Hayav. We saw this source already, that if someone sends a fire in the hands of someone who is deaf or not mentally competent, or a minor, the sender is not liable in the hands of a human court, but is liable in the heavenly court. And he's not liable in the human court because he did not burn something directly, but he did do something morally wrong in entrusting a dangerous item like a fire in the hands of someone who is not competent to take care of it. So he should not have done that. However, if he sends it, and in those three cases, nobody would be liable because you can't hold a minor liable. However, if someone sends it in the hands of someone who is an adult, intelligent person, then that person is liable. Just because someone sent him, en shalech lidvar avera, so the sender is not responsible, but the one who is actually holding the fire and mishandles it, burns something down, is liable. Now if you have a partnership, one person brings some fire there. He has a little lamp with fire, and the other one brings a bunch of wood. So the second one who brought the wood is liable because he's the one that brought the material, the fuel that would spread the fire. But it was the other way around. One person brought wood. He's not responsible. He just brought a pile of wood. But the second one then came and brought fire and caused it to burn. So the second one. The point is, it doesn't matter who brings the fuel and who brings the fire. The second person is the immediate cause and therefore is the one that's fully liable. If a third person comes, one person brought fire, one person brought wood, whatever order, and a third person comes and fans the flame. He blows on it or brings a fan or a bellows. They had bellows from 3,000 years ago. We have pictures of them on cave walls in Egypt, and next to in mummy caves. So a third person came and fanned the flame. The one who fans the flame, he's the immediate cause for the fire getting bigger and spreading, and therefore only the third person is liable. However, if the wind came and fanned the flame, then all of them are exempt because the wind is the immediate cause. In other words, it was out of their hands. It's true, one person brought wood, one person brought fire, but in the end, it was the wind that caused it to spread and cause damage, which is not any of their immediate faults. All right, Amar Resh Lakish Mishmei Dechizkiah Lo Shenu Ela Shemasa Lo Gachelet V'Liba Aval Masol Shel Hebet Hayav Ma'itama Masav Ka Gadmu Lo. Back to the giving it to a minor. Resh Lakish says the name of Chizkiah. When do we say that the one who gives it to the minor is exempt? Only if he gives him a glowing coal. That glowing coal is relatively safe because you just leave it and it'll eventually go out. So the miner had to go and bring this coal, touch it to something that flammable, blow on it. So that's very indirect. It requires more steps. So it's relatively safe to give it to a miner. However, if you give him a whole flame, a torch, that torch is very dangerous, and then it's more likely that the miner is going to take this torch, walk around with it, and is going to catch something on fire, and therefore the one who gives them a torch is liable. What's the reason? Because his action directly caused it. Giving a big flame, a torch to a miner, is more direct. But Rabbi Yochanan says, no, even a flame, if you give that to a miner, you'd not be liable. Because it's the tongues of the deaf person or the miner is what caused the fire to break out. In other words, he's holding it, let's say he's holding this torch with tongs. If you just leave it in one place, it wouldn't go and cause other things to go on fire. But rather, it's the tongs that he's holding and walking around with, so that caused it. So therefore, the adult who gave it to the minor is not liable because still it's indirect. And it's the minor that caused it by walking around. However, Ibn Yochanan would agree that if the adult gave to the minor a whole bunch of branches, silta sheraga, tahu vadai maseh dideh garmu, some branches of thin wood that are easily flammable, and sheraga, and a candle, then the sender is liable because his actions, giving him all the ingredients to cause a fire that will spread. So he's liable. In the previous cases, he only gave him either the coal or a torch, but that's just a fire. Then the miner would have to go and find something flammable, fuel, to spread the fire. But here, the adult is giving him both a little lamp and a whole bunch of flammable material. So then it's basically inevitable that the miner is going to say, like, oh, I wonder what happens if I put this fire here next to these branches. And so the sender is directly responsible and liable. Shalach biad pikach, hapikach chayav. So now we go on to the rest of it, and we're actually going to discuss this word, ve'liba. Someone else comes and fans the flame. Amar Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak, man detane liba lamishtabesh, man detane niba lamishtabesh. There's two versions of this Mishnah. Some say liba with a lamed, meaning to fan, and some say niba, also meaning to blow the flame, and both of them are not mistaken. They're both valid words, and they mean similar things. Man detane liba lamishtabesh, dichtib belabat esh, man detane niba lamishtabesh, dichtib borei nib sefatayim. If you say liba, you're not wrong, because the pasuk says belabat esh, referring to the burning bush. God's presence appears to Moshe belabat esh. So you see, liba means a fire, a flame. And so if you say niba, that's also okay, because Pasuk in Yeshaya says, Borei nib sefatayim, the fruit of the lips. What's the fruit of the lips? What do lips create? They create breath. And so by that would be referring to blowing on it, which is also fanning and creating or growing the fire. Okay, good. Now let's analyze this. One person brings some fire, one person brings some fuel, and one person might be even blowing on it a little, but then the wind comes and pushes it and causes it to spread and burn something down. All those three people are not liable. So now the Baraita expands on this and says, if a person blows on, fans the flame, and also wind comes and fans the flame even more. So is he liable or not? It depends. We assess. If let's say there was no wind, and only the person himself fanning it, would that be enough to make it go and cause damage? If yes, then the person is liable. But if not, he was just fanning it only a little bit, and it would not have caused damage without the wind, then he is not liable. Okay, so we have to see if his act was independently would have resulted in the injury, and if not, he's okay. And now we have a very interesting question, because we're going to compare this case of damages to Hilchot Shabbat. Why should the person not be liable when he only blows it a little bit, not enough to cause damage? Yet here, if someone is winnowing, you take some grain, and after threshing it, so that when you thresh it, that's you step on it, so that the chaff the outside of the grain will be will loosen up around the kernel of the grain. But they're still attached to each other, but they're just loose. They're just barely attached. That's threshing. The next step is winnowing, when the farmer will take a shovel or a rake, a pitchfork, and take some of that grain and throw it up in the air. Throwing it up in the air doesn't do much, but what it does do is, hopefully the wind will come, and the wind will blow away the chaff that's very light, and the grain, which is heavier, will fall down. So that's a way of separating the chaff that you don't want from the grain. Now, if someone does that on Shabbat, they are liable, even though it wouldn't work without the wind. If you just throw it up in the air and down, maybe just by falling it'll separate a little bit, but it hardly will do anything. And it's only because of the wind. So why is one liable on Shabbat for winnowing if his action by itself would not accomplish the task? And it's only because of the wind that accomplishes the task, and yet he is liable. So why don't we say the same thing here, that even though him blowing the fire a bit is not going to accomplish anything because it wouldn't have spread so far, but that in conjunction with the wind now does cause it to cause damage, so he should be liable there. What's the difference between the laws of damages and the laws of Shabbat? We're going to see three answers. Amar Abaye, Hacha askinan kegon sheliba misad echad velibatu haruach misad acher. Abaye is saying, you're right, in fact, the laws of Shabbat is a good model. And in fact, if someone was blowing on the fire in one direction and the wind also came in the same direction, he in fact would be liable. Here, when the Mishnah says not liable, it's talking about a case where they're blowing from different directions. The person is fanning it from the north, but the wind comes from the south, and so in fact his blowing it, if anything, would have just been stopping it a little bit from reaching its destination. So here it's clear that the wind and the wind only, even against the person's breath, is what caused the damage. But otherwise, if it was the same way, you're right, it would be would be liable, like in Shabbat. Rava amar kegon sheliba beruach mesuya v'libatu haruach beruach she'ena mesuya. Rava says that it's, for example, that when I'm blowing it and there's a regular, typical wind, and even with my fanning it and the typical wind, it would not have reached a dangerous place and caused damage. But all of a sudden, a crazy tornado wind came, which I could not have expected, and therefore I'm not liable because this is something that's honest, something that there's no way I could have anticipated. But otherwise, you're right. If in fact my breath together with the wind would have caused the damage, I would be liable, like in Shabbat. Rabbi Zera amar kegon de samera samure. Rabbi Zera says, no, not talking about a case where I really was fanning it with a fan or with a bellows or with a strong breath. There, if that combined with the wind caused damage, I would be liable. But here, when we say that he was fanning it, it's just that he's just breathing on it, right? Just some hot breath, not in a strong blow. So therefore, it really was not adding anything to it. But in fact, if it was adding a lot, then he would. Okay, these are three answers to say that, you know what? So the laws of Shabbat are a good model and are comparable to our case, and therefore they have to readjust our Mishnah to say our Mishnah is only talking about where he was blowing in the opposite direction, or a crazy, unusual wind came, or he was only breathing softly on it, but not actually blowing on it. But these are all difficult because you have to make an ukimta on the Mishnah that it only applies in a very limited case. But now we have a fourth answer. Rav Asher amar ki amrinan zoreh veruach mesayeh ato hanemil l'inyan Shabbat melechet machshevet asra Torah aval hacha gerama be'almahu ugrama b'nezakin patur. Rav Asher says there's a fundamental difference between laws of damages and the laws of Shabbat. When we say that when winnows, right, you throw up the grain in the air, and the wind helps, that is liable because we're talking about Shabbat. On Shabbat, what's the criteria to be liable? You need melechet machshevet, a planned behavior. You want to try to accomplish something. And here, the item that you're trying to accomplish is accomplished. You know that by throwing it up, then the wind will come, and then that will cause it to be separated. So for the laws of Shabbat, as long as what you accomplish is planned, whether or not you did all the steps or you just did part of the step and natural force like the wind comes and does the rest, you are liable. This is very interesting because melechet machshevet usually acts as a kula. If I do something, but I didn't plan to do it, I do an act that is a melacha, but I wasn't planning to accomplish that thing. I was planning to the usual thing that melacha is. I was doing the same act, but my intent was different. My intent was not to accomplish the usual act, my intent was for something else, so then one is patur. That's how Melechet Machshevet usually is applied. Here it's being applied lechumra, that even though I didn't do the whole thing, nevertheless, because my plan was accomplished, I am liable. Another example that's similar to this one is cooking on Shabbat in the oven. As there's no prohibition in particular to put something in the oven. If I put it in the oven for 2 seconds, it's not going to cook, so I put it in the oven, take it out. I didn't violate a deoraita if I do that. But if I put it in and then leave it in for a half hour till it cooks, then I am liable, even though all I did was put it in. And it's the oven by itself, that the heat of the oven that's cooking it over time. That's another example of where, even though I didn't do all of the act, still my intention is accomplished, and therefore I am liable. That's for Chot Shabbat. As long as one's plan is accomplished, one is liable. But when it comes to nizakin, in order to be liable, it has to be something that I do directly. I'm directly responsible for. But here, I am only indirect cause, and because all I did was blow on it a little bit, but the wind came. My blowing by itself would not have done anything, and it's the wind that accomplished the damage, and therefore, if I didn't do it directly and it's only indirect, for nizakin patur. For Shabbat, even if it's indirect, even if it's another cause, but it was part of my plan, then I am liable. Very, very important distinction there. Next Mishnah. Hasholech be'era v'achla esim o avanim o afar chayav shenemar ki teseh esh u'masea kosim v'nachal gadish o hakama o hasadeh shalem yeshalem hamav'ir et ha'be'era. Someone who sends a fire, meaning on purpose, or he allows it to escape, he doesn't stop it, he's not careful, and it goes and consumes wood or stones or earth, is liable. In other words, these are things that don't really burn. Well, wood burns, but stones and earth don't actually burn, but they can get ruined, right? A field that has a fire on it, even the soil itself can get burned. Even rocks can get ruined and get weak if you burn a brick wall, even though bricks are not flammable, but still it will weaken the wall. How do we know that? Because the pasuk says if a fire breaks out and it finds and lists 4 items: thorns, a stack of grain, meaning grain that's removed from the ground and piled up, or come out with standing grain that's still attached to the ground, or the field itself. The Gemara is going to explain that field itself means without anything on it, just the soil. So the person has to pay for causing that fire. Good. Gemara. Amar Rava. Lama li tichtav rachamana kosim gadish kama v'sadeh. Rava says, why does the Torah have to give all 4 examples? Why can't just give one example and I can figure out the rest of them? Sirichi di katav rachamana kosim hava min kosim hu dechayev rachamana mishum deshchiach esh gabayu v'shchiach de pasha aval gadish de la shiach esh gabayu de la shiach de pasha emala. If it only said thorns, I might think I'm liable for burning thorns because that's something that fire is often around thorns, because thorns are so cheap and they're all over the place. So people aren't really careful with fire around thorns. Like, so what? So it'll burn. Since this is very likely that a person will be negligent with his fire around thorns. So I would say in that case, one is liable. But when it comes to a pile of grain, where people are going to be careful, you're not going to bring a fire into your silo with all the grain there. Since that is not likely that someone will be negligent, maybe I would have thought that I don't have to pay in that case. So that's why it tells me the grain, yes, I do have to pay. And the other way around, if it only said regarding a pile of grain that I have to pay, that's because that's very expensive. And if I burn it down, you're losing all your merchandise, everything, all your food for the next season. But thorns, which who cares about thorns anyway? It's a very small loss. I would say maybe I'm not liable, and therefore has to teach this as well. So that's why I need the first 2 items on the list. Now, kama, standing grain, lamali, ma kama bagaloi, afkol bagaloi. Just like standing grain is exposed, you look at the field, you see all the grain standing there. So too, fire, one is only liable for that which is exposed. If I burn something and there's only liable for the things on top, if there's something hidden underneath, I'm not liable for that. That's according to the majority opinion. Yehuda disagrees, and he says one is liable if the fire catches fire on something that is hidden. One is also liable, so kama is not talking about that. So what is kama referring to? Lerabot kol ba'ale koma is coming to include anything that has stature, meaning anything that has some height, which would be trees, animals, actually anything, because pretty much everything in the world has some height, even something that's very short. So the examples in the Torah are only things in the field, but what about animals? What about other things? Someone's wagon, someone's vessels, right? So really everything is included. I need kama to say anything that stands, anything that has any height at all. But Rabbanan, and Rabbanan, where do they include all things that have some height? The word o is an extra word, and that comes to include both. From kama, I can learn that which is revealed, and o, anything that has some height. Rabbi Yehuda, what are you going to do with that awe? No, he needs the awe to separate between the different things. Don't think that you're only liable if you burn all the things on the list. No, any one of the things on the list, if you burn, you're liable. Rabbanan, how do you know that you're liable to any one of the things? Because there's another or hasadeh. So if that or tells me that any one of them is liable, then the other or before hakama, do hasadeh is after, is the last one in the list. Do hakama before that teaches me anything that has stature. Rabbi Yehuda says, I'm not going to learn anything else from the extra or before hasadeh, because since Torah already said or hakama, so it's just going to keep for consistency the same style and or hasadeh. But you can't learn anything from that or, and that's why he needs the previous or, lechalek. Now, sadeh lamali. Why do I need to give you an example of a field? That comes to include if you burned my plowed field or charred my stones. Even though a field by itself is not flammable, nor are stones flammable, but they still can be ruined and weakened from fire. It'll be hard to plant anything after, and that wall will be shaky. So now I say, well, sadeh seems like the biggest chidush, so why not just say field? And then I would know, if even rocks you're liable if you burn them, then all the more so anything else. No, I need that, because if you had only the word sadeh, I would say only that which is in the field, all the grain and the stuff that's in the field, but I wouldn't know anything else. I wouldn't know the field itself or rocks, and I might not know other things like the kama, the things that are standing, and so I need all the other things in the list, so that then I know that sadeh refers to the field itself and the stones. We now turn to some matters of Aggadah. Amar Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, En pur'anut ba'al ha'olam ela bizman shereshaim ba'olam, ve'ena matchelet ela min hasadikim techila, shene'emar, ki teseh esh masa kosim, matai esh yosa, bizman shekosim mesuyin la, ve'ena matchelet ela min hasadikim techila, shene'emar, ve'nechal gadish, ve'achal gadish lo ne'emar ela, ve'nechal gadish, shene'echal gadish kevar. All right, a very sad Aggadah that says, name of Rabbi Yonatan, that suffering comes to the world only because of the wicked people that are in it. However, the suffering, the destruction starts with the righteous, even though it's not their fault, even though it's the fault of the righteous for bringing such punishment. Nevertheless, it's the righteous that actually get punished first. How do you know that? This is why we're bringing it here from this very pasuk, which is clearly a legal pasuk, but Yonatan is taking it as an Aggadah. When fire meaning all calamity, death, destruction, punishment, comes, umatse'ah, kotzim, when does calamity come? When there are thorns. Thorns refers to the wicked people. Matse'ah means mitzuyin, are abundant. When there are a lot of wicked people, then fire comes down to the nation. And who does it start with? It starts by causing destruction, damage to the righteous people, as it says in the next words of the pasuk, and gadish, meaning grain, that which is valuable, that refers to tzaddikim, is or was eaten. It doesn't say, and then it will kill the righteous, but rather, and it already killed the righteous, that the righteous are already gone when the fire gets to the thorns. So it may seem unfair that the wicked do wrong and the righteous are the ones that suffer the consequences first, but that's the way it is. The righteous are responsible for the generation. They have to go and teach and rebuke and inspire the others, so they are the leaders and they are therefore responsible. Taneh Rav Yosef, my dichtiv atem lo tesu mish bepetach beto ad boker, kevan shetanu reshut lamashchit eno mavchin ben tzadikim l'resha'im. Along the same lines, Rav Yosef teaches. And a Baraita, Rav Yosef teaches a Baraita. What does the pasuk mean in Shemot 12, referring to Yetziat Mitzrayim, where Hashem says, and no one should leave the opening of their homes until morning. Stay inside during Makat Bechorot. There's going to be a terrible plague overnight. What does this mean? Why should everybody stay inside? Because once permission is given to the destroyer to destroy, it makes no distinction between the righteous and the wicked. So even though the Egyptians are the wicked and Bnei Yisrael are righteous, nevertheless, punishment is in town. You better stay inside, because otherwise, once the mashchit is here, it's going to kill anything in its path. And not only does it not distinguish, actually it does distinguish, and will kill the righteous first, as the different pasuk in Yechezkel says, I will cut off from you righteous and wicked. Righteous are mentioned first. Rav Yosef would cry about this and says all the righteous people are like nothing. We could have a whole group of righteous people, and then in 1 second a plague comes and they can all die. That's very tragic. Abaye consoles him and says, actually, it's a favor, it's a good thing for the righteous, as the pasuk says in Yeshaya, because of the evil, the righteous is taken away so that he will not have to endure the suffering. So it's actually a kindness to the righteous to die first, so that he doesn't have to see the terrible calamity that comes after. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Le'olam yikanes adam b'chi tov, v'yaseh b'chi tov, shneimar, v'atem lo toseu ish mipetach beto ad boker. Back on the pasuk we had before from Shemot 12, we learned that person should always go into a city at a time of good. Kitov, meaning when it's light. Vayad limetaor, kitov, light is called good. And you should also leave the city if you're going to leave on a journey. Leave in the daytime. Don't travel at night. Nighttime is dangerous. Rather, enter and leave and enter when it's daytime. And how do you know that? Because it says, do not leave your homes until morning. In the morning, then it's safe. At night, it's dangerous. Tenor Banan, Deber Ba'ir, Kanes Raglecha, Shenemar, Vatem lo tesu ish mepetach beto ad boker. Another teaching based on the same pasuk. When there's a plague in the city, then bring your feet in. In other words, do not travel. Don't leave your house. Don't go into the street. Stay at home. We call this COVID quarantining. As it says, do not leave your house until the morning, until it's better. Ve'omer lech ami bo b'chadarecha usko delatcha ba'adecha. A second pasuk in Yeshaya that says, come, enter your chamber, shut the door behind, hide yourselves for a while, until the anger passes. Ve'omer, a third pasuk from Devarim in the curses, mechus teshakel chayrib u'mechad harim ema. Outside, the sword is killing people, and inside, there is terror, right? Even the people inside are still afraid, hearing all the screams and suffering that is outside, and wondering if it may come in. Mai ve'omer, v'chitem ahanemila bilalya, aval bimama la, Tashema lech ami bo b'chaderecha uskod delatecha. Unfortunately, these Pesukim have too many resonances to October 7th. So now we ask, why do we need 3 Pesukim? What's ve'omed, and you need another Pasuk? Well, how come it's not enough to still learn from the first Pasuk? When it's dangerous outside, stay inside. So if you say that, when do you have to be afraid? Only at night, because in the first Pasuk it says, stay inside at night, but in the morning you can come out. There's no problem in the morning. That's why the second Pasuk says, Lech ami bo b'chaderecha uskodatecha, go in your room and close the door all the time, day and night, until the anger has passed. But if there's and if you say, when should you stay inside? Only when there's no fear inside. When the danger is only outside, then stay inside. But if there is danger inside also, right? Let's say there's some kind of dangerous things happening in the house as well. Well, then you may as well go outside, so you could be with people, to be in the company of others, right? Suffering loves company, and so better to be outside. No, don't think that. Tashema mechus teshakel cher mechadrim ema fagabdim mechadrim ema mechus teshakel cherev. This pasuk says that the sword is bereaving people outside, and there is terror inside. So even though there's terror inside, and maybe inside is not so safe, and there's dangers even staying inside, nevertheless, the danger outside is much worse. Outside, there's the sword. Outside, there's gunshots and all that. Inside is still dangerous, but still safer than outside. Rava be'idan ritcha haveh sachar kaveh. When there was a plague, Rava would close the windows of his house. This is a good idea. And any airborne viruses, if you close the windows, it won't come in, because death has come up to the windows. So says Yirmiyah. Tenor Banan Ra'a ba'ir pazer raglecha shenemar vahi ra'a ba'aris vayered Avram Misraima lagur sham ve'omer im amarnu nabo ha'ir v'ra'a ba'ir v'matnu sham. If there's a famine in the city, then get your feet up, as opposed to before, when there's a plague, then stay inside, stay in one place, which is good advice. But if there's a famine, don't just sit around and do nothing. Get out of there and go to a place where there's food. You learn that from Abraham when there was a famine in the land, so he left and went to Mitzrayim to stay there. Ve'omer, and there's another pasuk from Sefer Melachim. This is a story about the 4 Mesoraim that were outside of the Israelite city because they had Sara'at, and there was a famine in the city. And they said, what should we do? Should we go back in the city? There's a famine in there, so we'll die. Should we stay out here? We'll die. So let's go to the encampment of the Arameans, and we'll see. Maybe they'll save us and we'll live. And they have food over there. And if they kill us, we'll die, but we're going to die anyway. And so you see the same thing here, because there was a famine in the city. Better to go and give yourself up into the enemy camp rather than stay in a place where for sure there is a famine. Now, my ve'omer, why do I need the second pasuk? Because I might think, when should you leave the famine and go to another place? Only where the other place you're going to go to, there's no problem that you might be killed there. Avraham goes to Mitzrayim. Actually, Avraham was afraid that they are going to kill him and take his wife, but he had a plan. He passed her off as his sister, and so that's how he would save not being killed. They're not usually killing people randomly in Egypt. So there's no danger to life there. But if there is danger of life, maybe stay in the place of famine and don't go to a place that's dangerous where they might kill you. You might have thought that. That's why in the second pasuk, you know what? Better to go into an enemy camp, and maybe they'll at least take you hostage and give you food, rather than stay in a place that has no food at all. And that's what we learned from that source. I wonder if this is maybe a subtle reference to the story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai during the siege of the Romans around Yerushalayim in 70 CE, where the people inside, the zealots, burned down all the storehouses of food, and the people inside had a terrible, terrible famine. They were dying from the famine. Remember the story of Marta bat Baitos, who died of famine. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, better to get out of here and plead with the Romans. At least maybe they will have mercy rather than stay inside, and he sneaks out. If there is a plague in the city, do not walk in the middle of the street, because the angel of death walks in the middle of the street. As we said before, once it's given permission, it goes out in the open and kills everybody. It doesn't have to hide, so it goes in the middle of the street because it's in charge. But if it's peace in the city, then opposite. You should walk in the middle of the street. Don't go on the sides of the road, because since the angel of death does not have permission during time of peace, so it hides on the sides of the road, and the sides of the road are more dangerous. This is good advice, right? During COVID, we all learned, stay away from crowds. Don't walk in the middle of a big street where there's lots of people. Go in a private area so that you won't have to be around a lot of people. That's good advice during a time of a plague. When it's not the time of a plague, probably the middle of the street is better, because on the sides of the street, all kinds of hooligans or dangerous things or garbage or disgusting things are on the side of the road, and so the middle of the road would be better. If there is plague in the city, one should not go by himself into the synagogue. Synagogues back then were often outside of the city, and if it were not used, it would be a desolate and dangerous area. So because the angel of the death keeps his stuff there, so that's a dangerous place. However, that's only if there's no children learning in the synagogue and there's not 10 men praying in the synagogue. But if it's being used, then it's not a dangerous place. If you hear dogs crying, that means it's dangerous, the angel of death is around. But if the dogs are playing, that's a good sign. That means Eliyahu Navi is coming to the city. But that's only if there's no female dog. If there's a female dog, then they're playing because of her presence. So then it doesn't explain. Otherwise, I guess the dogs have a sixth sense, and so as long as no external reason to see why they are mourning or playing, it means that they are sensing something to come. So these two students, Rav Ameh Rab Aseh, are sitting before their teacher, Rabbi Yitzchak Napacha. Mor amar le lema mor shemateta. Mor amar le lema mor Aggadah. Aggadata. One of the students says, I want to learn some halacha. But the other student says, no, I want to learn Aggadah. I'm in the mood for that. Petach le memar Aggadata la shabik mor. Petach le memar shemateta la shabik mor. So the teacher started saying some Aggadah, but the other student who wanted to learn halacha says, no, I don't want to learn Aggadah. I want to do some serious stuff here. So he started teaching halacha, and the other one says, no, I can't concentrate on halacha right now. I want to feel inspired. I want to learn some Aggadah. So Rabbi Yitzchak Napacha said, what am I going to do? Amar lehem, emshor lechem mashal. I'll give you a parable. Lema davar domeh, l'adam sheyesh lo shete nashim, achat yalda v'achat zekena. A person, let's say, has two wives. One is an older woman and one is a young woman. Yalda melaketet lo levanot, zekena melaketet lo shechorot. Nimsa kereyach mikan umikan. The younger wife is pulling out the white hairs of her husband so that he will look younger, more like her age. And the older wife is pulling out his black hairs so that he will look older, more like her age. And what happens in the end? He ends up being bald because the one's pulling out the white, one's pulling out the black. which is a pretty funny story. Happens to be that this mashal is found in Aesop's fables as well. Aesop's fables are centuries older than the Talmud, and you have the exact same fable there. So that means that not that Rabbi Yitzchak Napacha himself was reading Aesop's fables, but rather that this was a famous fable, famous story like nursery rhymes today. You don't have to go read it inside. Everybody just knows them from popular culture. So this was a popular thing, and Rabbi Yitzchak Napacha quoted it because it was relevant to the two students, that each one, if he wanted to say halacha, this one wouldn't let him, that Aggadah, that one wouldn't let him, and now he's bald, he has nothing to teach. But he has a solution. I can teach you something that will be good for both of you because it combines both halacha and Aggadah. And it relates to our pasuk. Ki teseh esh u'masea kosim teseh me'asma shalem yishalom bari u'tabe'era makadosh baruch hu alay l'shalem et ha'be'era shehib'arti. Yes, first the pasuk says, if a fire goes out and catches in thorns. So this indicates that it goes out by itself. The owner might be negligent, but the fire spreads on its own. But then the pasuk goes on and says, Yeshalem hamav'ir, the one who kindled it shall compensate, which sounds like it's a direct burning, taking the fire and directly burning. Right, there's two halves of the pasuk indicate two different types of action. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I am responsible for to pay for the fire that I kindled, meaning the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash and of Jerusalem. Ani hesiti esh b'Sion, shene'emar vayaset esh b'Sion v'tochal yesodoteha. I'm the one that I'm responsible for kindling the fire that destroyed Sion, as Pasuk says in Echa. Hashem kindled the fire in Sion, devoured its foundations. Now, really, it kind of happened on its own, right? The enemies came and they burnt it down. So that's the beginning of the first half of the pasuk when it happens. But ultimately, even though they are the immediate cause of it happening and Hashem just let it happen, nevertheless, Hashem is responsible. So just like if a person allows fire to go and spread and his negligence doesn't stop it, it's considered the same as if he does it himself and he's liable. He does it directly. So too, when Hashem allowed, even though Hashem only allowed the Bet HaMikdash to be destroyed, but by not doing anything about it and allowing it to be destroyed, it's the same as Hashem destroying it directly. And therefore Hashem says, I take responsibility and I am going to repay. Beautiful pasuk in Zechariah says, I will be a wall of fire around her, and I will be a glory in her midst. You won't even need a physical wall. I will be personally protect Yerushalayim in the future. Shemateta patacha katuv b'niskei mamono v'siyem b'niskei gufo lomar lecha isho mishum chaysav. And so that was a beautiful Aggadah, but we also learn a halacha from it, that the pasuk starts talking about damage caused by property, meaning like the fire is my property. It's not me myself, but it's something that I own. That went out by itself, just like an ox that I own is my property, and it goes out and causes damage. So too fire. And the pasuk concludes talking about something that I do directly, right? The one who kindled the fire, right? Meaning I bring the fire right up and I burn something, and it's equating them to say that fire is the liability of fire is the same as that of arrows. Even though an arrow, I'm shooting it far away, so I'm not touching the item that I'm damaging. Nevertheless, it comes directly from my force, right? It's my force that pulls the bow, shoots the arrow, and then even though it goes far away, it's still called a direct action from my force. So to fire, even though I didn't light it directly, but I let it spread. That's considered the same. So we have here something that is both an halacha and an Aggadah. This is, we already saw a few times in the Masechet the way the Talmud takes Pesukim regarding damages that just sound like they're talking about damages and applies them Aggadically to talk about the punishment of Bnei Israel and the destruction of enemies and liability and so on. And here Hashem himself taking taking responsibility and therefore promising to eventually recompense and repay and bring things back to the way they were. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.